Hello and welcome to Demand Driven Matters, the podcast that addresses all things related to demand-driven manufacturing. This is the second episode in our series focusing on the 5 elements to drive flow. Today we're going to talk about Synchronize activities. Our guest today is John Maher, Vice President of Product Strategy for Synchronization Manufacturing Software. John has been a regular guest and comes with all kinds of credentials related to various manufacturing technologies and methodologies. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Pam. Happy to be here.
Well, once again, let's just level set as we get into our discussion here and talk about really what is demand-driven manufacturing. John, can you give us a one-sentence summary on what you define as demand-driven manufacturing?
Sure. Not sure if I can boil it down into one sentence. Demand-driven manufacturing is really about aligning as tightly to your customer demand signal as you can. So that's why I would say it's a key sentence. And that doesn't mean that everyone is going to be a make-to-order environment. It just means that even if you are in make-to-stock, you get your inventory buffers and your alignment of your organization is tightly coupled to that demand signal as you can from your customer.
Great, and we're going to talk quite a bit in detail about that today. So, and we've talked about the key components of demand-driven manufacturing being synchronization and flow. In this podcast series, we're focusing on flow. Last time we addressed controlled release. In this episode, we're going to focus on synchronization of activities. So, John, I think we all get the benefit of synchronizing information. It provides a single version of the truth, but the challenge is how to aggregate that information, which we'll address later. But first, can you speak a bit about local efficiencies versus global effectiveness?
Sure. Since most manufacturing organizations don't have systems that really allow them to view kind of the global impact of their local decisions, a lot of the metrics and a lot of the decisions that organizations make are really at that local level. So they're looking at one resource or one work cell and seeing if they optimize, with this idea that if we optimize each individual, that the rest of the organization will be optimized. And, really from experience and from what I've seen in manufacturers, nothing could be further from the truth, because really it comes down to how well they're synchronized to what the overall organization needs. Pretty much in every manufacturing organization, you have convergent points, whether that be sub-assemblies or assemblies or at the time of shipment. Those parts need to come together, and if the different resources are working on different priorities based on their local efficiency, then we're just going to have piles of work in process and a lot of unneeded searching and expediting for parts throughout the organization as we hit those convergent points.
So, John, do you have a favorite sports analogy that you'd like to interject here?
Well, since we're in football season, we could inject one. And, basically all 11 players out on the football field need to be synchronized in what they're doing. It doesn't matter if all of them are performing optimally. They need to know how that play is supposed to transpire. So if, let's say, a receiver is running a route and the quarterback believes that they're running a go route, they might run the best curl route they've ever run, and the quarterback may throw the best go route they've ever passed. But, if they're not in sync with each other, that doesn't work. And same with, running plays. You can have each offensive lineman throw great blocks, but if they're not synchronized and the running back's not synchronized, hit the hole right when it opens up, then the play doesn't matter. So it's more about how they work as a unit as opposed to how they work individually. And it's the same in manufacturing, because, we're talking about an interconnected system where they rely on one another.
Perfect. Great analogy. So let's focus in a little bit here on planning and scheduling. So this is kind of the traditional approach to manufacturing, planning, and scheduling. Can you tell us what's wrong with this?
Yeah, so the real issue is that we're basically, in most manufacturers, they're decoupling the planning and scheduling from the execution side of things, right? So generally, planning and scheduling kind of occurs on their own timeline throughout the day, and they throw it over the wall to execution to execute on, and then the next day they reconvene to see how things went and then reset priorities. The reality is that throughout the entire business day, different things are occurring, different variabilities occurring, whether it be external things like our customer calling up with a change request or suppliers calling up to say the products got delayed, or internal things like machines running faster or slower than we thought, or we have a cycle count and we're missing some inventory. All of that variability, basically, the moment that planning and scheduling throws that schedule over the wall, it starts to degrade in its ability to give the priority and keep in alignment. So, what we really advocate, which is on the next slide, is basically to tie all those things together so that planning and scheduling always knows what's going on in execution, and execution always knows what's going on in planning and scheduling, and have that real-time harmonization of all three of those areas. And, basically, when you achieve that, there's a lot less confusion about what to do to respond to the variability. Priorities become a lot more clear, and overall where the organization's at and what the organization should be doing becomes clear from the system, and it gets rid of all those auxiliary things that you see in manufacturers, such as post-it notes or red hot folders or rush stamps or pick your method.
Got it. So John, if we've got some listeners out there who are thinking of moving towards a more synchronized approach, any best practice tips for doing so, or do you have any examples of clients that you've helped through this transition, and some advice that you would give our listeners?
Sure. So I focus a lot on technology, is about enabling this through technology. So and it's a very difficult thing to do manually, because again, if you look at synchronization, it's very hard to have that global view of what the world should be like. On a manual basis, if it works within your environment, the closest I've seen kind of come to it is manual, doing either manual Kanban, or if you go the constraints management route, doing kind of the manual drum buffer rope. But those solutions tend to be better than what people are doing today, but they don't really get you to the full extent that technology can do from
you would have some challenges
synchronization.
Scaling too.
Yep. Okay. It is a challenge to manually scale that up, and really, as far as what to look for, you really need to look for an environment that's based more off real time. So not having a batch schedule regen that you run, or a batch like MRP process that you run, but something that really is always looking at the variability and keeping it in alignment with what's actually going on.
Got it. I keep harkening back to your football analogy. Football is all real time, right? Yep. And so, somebody jumps offside, you've got a disruption. Somebody, there's 20 men on the field, you've got a disruption. So there's all kinds of things, variables that can happen, right, that throw you off track. But, having everybody synchronized, everybody on the same playbook produces a winning, winning play.
Yep.
So, okay. So we've talked about specifically planning, scheduling, and execution. Let's look at the broader, more of an enterprise view of synchronization. Can you talk about the benefits of synchronizing all layers of manufacturing?
Yeah, so really when we talk about synchronization, you can think about material flow through the process, but really we are talking about material flow, we're talking about human actions that people take. We're talking about synchronization of information throughout the entire environment. So, we talk planning, scheduling, and execution, which is a part of it, right? But it really comes to having the information available, the feedback loops available to every area within the organization, whether it be customer-facing individuals, whether it be, right in the middle of your value stream, whether it be manufacturing support areas, so that engineering is working on what manufacturing needs from them, so that, facilities or maintenance is working on the things that are most important to manufacturing, and then tying that out back into our supply chain as well, so that suppliers are always in alignment with what we need, and so that we kind of get out of this space of constantly bullwhipping or sliding our suppliers around and what their priority is, just working really to have a synchronized view of the entire manufacturing environment and their supply chain.
And John, it all makes perfect sense. Why isn't every manufacturer doing this?
So really when I look at, and been doing it for quite a number of years now, but there was first the method that needed to change, right? The movement from push to pull, and that really occurred to me in the U.S. and Europe. It started it, earlier in Japan with Toyota production system, but it basically evolved process-wise, and the technology wasn't really keeping up with it. So technology was being in the way, and it was almost seen as like an obstacle within the transformation. And it's taken a while for technology vendors to create the solutions that are going to support that real-time, demand-driven environment within the organizations. And then it's taken the time for the people that were leading the process view to understand that technology is a part of the process, that technology can help to eliminate waste and create this synchronization. So we're really at that place in time where both process and technology are coming together in this unified front for demand-driven manufacturing.
Got it. Technology and manufacturing emerging like never before.
Yes.
And enabling all of these this synchronization of activities. Changing focus a little bit. So Gartner has published a lot of research around the value of demand-driven manufacturing, and they've created their 5 stages of demand-driven manufacturing maturity. And here are some of the benefits that they've stated of collaboration across the supply chain. John, is there anything you would add to this list based on your experience?
I think Gartner has a pretty all-inclusive list. The main things that I would state, like looking at this list, is they talk about reduced variability in lead times, but reducing the overall lead time and cycle time overall we see. And then as far as better forecast accuracy, part of becoming demand driven is reducing your reliance on that forecast, certainly using the forecast to understand, like, if you need replenishment buffers, how much and where at. But part of having better forecasting accuracy is reducing that horizon that you have to look at from a forecast. It's much easier to forecast what you're going to use in the next 3 to 4 weeks than it is, a year from now or 2 years from now. So really cutting down on the horizon that we need to look at makes it easier from a forecasting perspective. And one of my experiences is just it's a hard number to really, or it's a hard thing to good numbers too, but the stress, the chaos, the overall employee satisfaction of working in environments that become more demand driven is much higher, which impacts your turnover rates and people's overall performance as well.
Great. Thanks for that. Okay, let's leave our listeners with some practical advice for synchronizing their activities. Certainly technology is the enabler, as we've talked about. If someone wanted to explore a technology solution, what advice would you give them for evaluating technologies?
Yeah, so I think there's 4 main things that I would suggest our listeners to look into. If we're talking about synchronization, a big question would be, what are you synchronizing to, right? So I would always focus on technologies that really take that customer or order-centric view of the world, right? Mm-hmm. If you're talking to a technology provider and they're talking to you about resource optimization or inventory optimization. Those things are good, but they have to have the global view. So you really want something that's anchored to the customer and synchronized to the customer. Something that gives you that global view, right? So that when you're making localized decisions, you can understand what the impact of that's going to be on the organization as a whole. Because many times you have to, as an organization, make suboptimal decisions at the local level to get optimal flow through the overall environment.
Right.
And then if you are, going through a software demo or experiencing the software, kind of take a walk through the value stream and see how the priorities align. Are the upstream operations really aligning to what the downstream operations need? So then the final thing is, when change happens, customer calls up, they make a change in due date, they need it 2 weeks earlier, or we do a cycle to Talentum where we have less inventory than we thought, or a supplier calls up and says a product is going to be late. How many steps, how many actions does the user have to take to realign the organization and the overall supply chain based on those, right? Because if you have way too many, people aren't going to be able to keep up with it. You really want the system making the decisions that the system can, and then providing good information to the user to make the decisions that it cannot.
All right. Well, thank you, John. This is a great episode on synchronization of activities. Any listeners out there who would like to learn more about demand-driven manufacturing, at synchrono.com/resources, there's all kinds of information available, including white papers and various case studies on demand-driven manufacturing. We encourage you to seek those out. So next up in our series on 5 key elements to drive flow, we're going to focus on continuous improvement. So I hope you'll join us for that session. Thank you very much.